right. Welcome, everybody. We will go ahead and get started so that we can give Ross Kreamer his time to speak and so that you guys have time to ask questions. But first, I'd like to introduce Ross Kreamer, who is a center alum. He's class of 76. He is a retired minister counselor for agricultural affairs with the U.S. Foreign Service. So, Ross, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you, Brianna. And good morning to all of you out there in Zoom land. My scope of work this morning is just to sort of introduce the Foreign Service to you. Some of you may well know or maybe even grew up in a Foreign Service family. Others don't have any idea. Let me just say that it's a great career. For 37 years, being overseas mostly, occupied my every thought and move. Foreign service generally may be described as the formulation and implementation of policy, for foreign affairs, an extraordinarily important thing. When you think about it, every administration comes in and it has its own set of ideas, and those ideas have to be implemented and they have to be formulated into policy. So it's a very challenging, constantly overturning kind of career. I encourage anyone who enjoys living overseas to consider it. But then again, you don't really have to be overseas to be in the Foreign Service. You can work in the various departments that are here in town. I'm speaking to you from our home here in Washington, D.C. It's a great place to live, by the way. It's great for walkers like me. But in Washington, D.C., most of the jobs that support the attaché services overseas are here in the State Department, in the Commerce Department, Agriculture, Justice Department, and on and on. During my decades overseas, the Foreign Service grew to a large number of people sitting around the U.S. Ambassador's country team meeting every week. I will tell you that it's very exciting to live overseas. That's obvious. You get to meet people and you get to work with people from other countries. You, in some cases, get to learn another language. In my case, no single language was ever better than my Kentucky English. But if you try, you can enjoy yourself in another language, meeting other people, learning new customs, a culture, and enjoying it. It's a challenge to work with people from overseas because in my case, I was their boss, of course, but you have to lead a team, so you have to understand all kinds of things in order to prosper. The Foreign Service is an up and out proposition. In other words, your performance is reviewed every year and you're ranked, priority ranked. And if you are at a certain level, you might be promoted. If not, you're not. But you're still in the job. And after a number of years, if you haven't been promoted, then you are out. You don't have a job. So it's somewhat of a challenge, and it can be a consideration for some of you out there. It's the kind of job that, in my experience, has a long time horizon. In other words, you can't really give 5 years to it and then say, well, I've done that, I've been there, and it's time to move on. Many people do, and many of my friends today were in the Foreign Service for 5 or 6 or 10 years, but they moved on to other jobs. But we still, have a great friendship. Well, there's one adage from China that I like to invoke, and that is in support of the idea of living overseas and representing the United States overseas. I mean, that's really what it is. You're representing whatever it is you're working on inside an embassy or a consulate. And it's it's very, I would say, a heavy responsibility to be able to articulate what the policies are, to explain things in some detail, to support trade negotiations, implementation. All of that is heady stuff. And to do it overseas requires that you keep up with what's happening back in Washington, D.C., and you are the person on the ground, as I like to say, outstanding in the field because of agriculture. That's a pun. Another great line from China, though, is the emperor is far and the mountain is high. And that means that when you're overseas, you have a certain degree of autonomy of thought, word, and deed, which people who are in the trenches, so to speak, in Washington, D.C., don't necessarily enjoy. Conversely, working in Washington, D.C. is great because you're right in the center of things, in the nerve center. So when things happen, you know it first if you're working in Washington, D.C. So throughout my career, I alternated between overseas posts and then posts back in the bureaucracies here in D.C., in the Department of Agriculture. I've been asked to explain how I got into the Foreign Service from Centre College, Danville, Kentucky. Let me say that, like many people of my generation, their first taste of overseas life was as a Peace Corps volunteer. And indeed, I went to Peace Corps in Ghana, where I was an agricultural extension volunteer. From there, I realized that, wow, there's this U.S. embassy that I didn't even know existed. That was in Accra, Ghana. And I got to know some of the people who worked in there. And I thought, well, good gracious, this might be just the right thing for me. So after a period of years as a volunteer, I became a trainer of volunteers. And that, in due course, in less than about more than a year, it led to an appointment as an associate Peace Corps director in Ghana for agriculture. Now that move put me on the road to the Foreign Service because I was inside the embassy community. We sat around the ambassador's country team table to report on what volunteers were doing. And it gave me a flavor for the other sections of the embassy. For example, the Agency for International Development, which is one way to experience the Foreign Service. And then the political section, the economic section, the science and technology section, and on, even the military attaché. So from that point, I understood fully that I needed to go back to graduate school if I truly wanted to get the job I wanted. The U.S. ambassador to Ghana said, Ross, given your interests and your love of being outstanding in the field, why don't you look at this Foreign Agricultural Service? I'd never heard of it. And when I went back to graduate school, and I selected a graduate school that had a strong agriculture program, Cornell University. So in economics, so in rural development. So I was spending every moment trying to get myself powered up to be an attractive prospect for the people hiring. Ultimately, thankfully, I had good mentors in graduate school, and they pointed me in the right direction. I was able to, actually I was given an offer from the Foreign Agricultural Service, which I took, and an offer from the U.S. Agency for International Development, which I politely declined. And from that point on, it was going from overseas post back to DC, overseas post back to DC, on and off. until I retired in 2017. So I've been happily retired for 3 years, and I'm always keen to talk with people who may be energized by the prospect of representing the United States overseas officially in embassies and consulates around the world. Well, I think that's about enough from me. I've spoken about 10 minutes. So we have 20 minutes more, and I am prepared to answer to the best of my ability any questions you might have. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a question. I'm a senior. My name is Pearl. I'm a senior at Center College and an international studies major. I'm actually like applying for the Peace Corps, so that's really cool. I was wondering, because I'm also interested in the foreign service, and you mentioned that you did your master's. Do you recommend like either work experience or doing your master's to be more competitive for the foreign service? Like, does it matter like to even get your master's for the foreign service?
Well, great question. And I'll have to say that although the parameters change slightly from year to year, there may well be a requirement to have a master's degree. Certainly for the Foreign Agricultural Service, it was a prerequisite. When I joined, in fact, maybe 50% of the attachés had PhDs. Over time, however, the requirement to have an ag economist has shifted over to someone who just basically can speak and represent and knows something about trade. So it may not be necessary, for example, if you want to go to the State Department in that route. I know that they recruit actively from undergraduates. And there may be opportunities, even after you become a Foreign Service officer of the state, to get a graduate degree, a master's. In some cases, some of my friends at the State Department have even gone on to get PhDs funded by the U.S. Department of State. So you don't need a master's degree to be a Peace Corps volunteer. I think they still have some kind of working understanding that enthusiasm and an interest in other people is primary. But they will look at any kind of experience you have, relevant experience. Certainly international relations would put you a peg above, let's say, another candidate for the Peace Corps that doesn't have that background.
Thank you.
Well, it's a quiet bunch out there, Brianna.
I know. Does anybody else have any other questions? This is the perfect time to ask them.
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
So I'm also applying to the Peace Corps, but this year I've found it's a little bit more difficult of a time, especially with the uncertainty with COVID and everything about placement and whether or not the same amount of volunteers will be placed, or if anyone will be placed in the coming years. So I've been looking for alternatives, at least in the short term, to do other meaningful work, like maybe AmeriCorps or other things like that. And I was wondering if you had any advice on what kind of programs would be useful.
Well, AmeriCorps, for example, is a very good program. I didn't have that experience myself, but I have many friends who've done that. And in fact, a couple who went from AmeriCorps into the Peace Corps later. So there is a lot of comparability. Today, given the COVID-19 shakedown of everything, in fact, it is my understanding that all Peace Corps volunteers have been withdrawn from their service countries and are back in the States now. Yes, it is hard to know how to predict the future when a lot of it is predicated on an effective, safe vaccine for the coronavirus. So looking for something else is a great thing to do. and I encourage you to, look around. Pardon me. For example, one thing that COVID-19 has shown me is that almost every job is not location specific. Certainly here in Washington, where most things are locked down. For example, my wife works at a museum, and she works from the house every day. So it's possible for you to look into certain kinds of jobs that might not be location specific. You could be sitting anywhere and contribute and get the work experience that you need to further your advantages into any future careers. The aspect of living in Washington, D.C. used to be rather attractive. I mean, I love it. It's not where I was born. It's not where I spent most of my life, but now I'm here permanently now. And there's something good about Washington. Now, if you're thinking about Peace Corps, or any of the agencies in town, or even just getting a taste of DC, when things clear up, I would say, then, DC would be a very solid choice for a job prospect. There are lots of entry-level jobs for college graduates that typically lead to something else, perhaps even graduate school, but not necessarily. That is just one of the added values of being local here in Washington, D.C., because so much happens and there are different opportunities. I might ask you, have you looked online? I guess that's the only way you can look to see, what kinds of opportunities there might be for employment, distance employment.
Yeah, I've done a good amount of looking. I'm still in the process of trying to find. I applied for Peace Corps and Fulbright in the fall, and those are really like what I wanted to do. And as the months have passed, the realization that might not be possible this year is really setting in. So I've been looking more into AmeriCorps programs, and I've looked at a few remote internships in DC that look really interesting, but I haven't gotten everything together to apply to them yet.
Right. Well, I would encourage you to just exhaust all potential opportunities. I mean, you've never turned down an opportunity you haven't applied for, as they say. And good luck.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions?
Yes, I have another question. Was there any skills that you learned at Center that helped you when you were a Peace Corps volunteer and also helped you when you were in the Foreign Service?
Oh, absolutely. Liberal arts education is fundamental to being able to speak, think clearly, or at least to be a clear thinker, and also to write. I have written thousands of pages of reports of different types: analytical reports, background reports, policy papers, position papers, white papers, you name it. And all these skills are just fundamental to a Center College education. So I was also at Center a biology major, and knowing how science is put together is very important overseas, because it used to be, or at least it was in my day, that science-based everything was so key, so important, certainly in bilateral relations with countries that might not have the same sets of regulations as the United States. So the idea was that other countries might mirror our regulations, and in doing so, they would become better partners for the U.S. and be able themselves to further their trade with other countries. So Center College is just best place to get all those skills nailed down. Also, the scale of things at Center, forces you to, to interact with, excellent professors and students, and that's important. I when I retired, there was a seminar, and I sat next to a person. I looked at her and I said, I think that you might have been a student at Center College. And she looked back at me and said, well, indeed I was. So it's been 50 years since I saw this person at Center College, but she went into the Foreign Service, but through the State Department, and retired as a former ambassador to Mauritania. But her approach was in the business management aspect of the State Department. And it wasn't really anything that she majored in at Center College, but she said that, yeah, the 4 years in Danville, Kentucky at Center College really helped to set her course. She was very happy to be a Center College graduate. So it's worth the money, and it's worth the effort, and that's where I'd put it.
That's awesome.
Do we have any other questions? I think we have a few more minutes left. Well, if not, Ross, do you have any last minute thoughts for the rest of our time? I think we've got till about 10:15. So if you have any last minute thoughts for the students.
Well, I would encourage everyone not to lose heart over their situation vis-a-vis coronavirus, the COVID-19. It's hit the whole country, the whole world, of course. And things gradually will return to a more normal state, but things will be different as a result of the discoveries made during this year of shutdown, this year of being sequestered or bivouacked in your dormitory, in your home, not being able to interact with folks. Things will change for the better. And prospects for employment for college graduates will improve. So don't lose heart with your future. Just know that it's going to be over one day soon. And look at me. I'm an elderly person. I don't feel elderly, but if I look back and thought, well, one single year, one bad year, well, it all gets leavened by the passage of time. So who knows? Maybe in 50 years, if you're a freshman at Center College, you'll look back on it and say, well, that was really something. That was some experience. I'm glad it's over, but it certainly didn't thwart my aspirations or success.
Great words. Thank you, Ross.
My pleasure. And if anybody wants to follow up on any of this, I am available.
Yeah, just feel free to reach out to the CCPD if anybody needs to get in touch with Ross.
Well, maybe I should just give you a plug too, Brianna, because this, your outfit at the college did not exist in my days. And it's wonderful. I've been there, I've talked with people, with students, and I think that it's really doing right by Center and by the students especially to have this this facility and this outreach. So keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Ross. And are you on the Career Mentor Network? I was going to say the students could go on there and find you there. I believe.
I am not what you would call a very techno-savvy creature. However,
that's okay.
I think I might be.
I think you are. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. So if the students would like to go on the Career Mentor Network that we have, I think you can find Ross on there. So
I know my wife, who didn't go to Center College, she mentored someone who was a senior at Center College, and that was quite a fruitful mentoring. It involved time here in DC, and also it was some distance or what remote work for her museum, and I think that person is now pursuing a PhD at a major university. Yeah.
Oh. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
All right. Well, we hope everybody has a happy holidays and have a good day today.
Yep. Cheers. Let's see, now what do I do here?
Oh.
I leave. There we go.